Have you ever heard of a metropolis so fortified that its inhabitants believed it was literally immortal? A nation that faced the greatest armies of the ancient world and emerged victorious until one day it simply ceased to exist. What I'm about to reveal goes far beyond a simple history lesson. We're talking about an entire civilization that made choices so devastating that its name became synonymous with warning for all following generations. And here's what truly frightens. The same behavioral patterns that annihilated this society are happening today, right under our eyes. Keep watching, because in the next few minutes you'll understand why the story of Samaria isn't dead history, but an urgent alert for the present. What we'll discover together has the power to revolutionize your perspective on success, failure, and the true meaning of prosperity. Before we dive into this journey, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and activate all notifications. This content may disappear without prior warning. Leave your like now and prepare yourself for the most impactful narrative you'll hear in the next few hours. Samaria wasn't just another settlement on the Middle Eastern map. Founded by monarch Omri approximately in 880 before the Common Era, it was strategically positioned atop an elevation that offered incomparable visual control of the surrounding region. Serving as headquarters for the northern kingdom of Israel, this urban complex transformed into a commercial epicenter, nucleus of political influence, and symbol of unprecedented abundance. Its fortifications were so monumental that rival armies felt intimidation merely contemplating their magnitude. The palatial complexes boasted decorations in ivory brought from distant lands. The commercial squares teemed with exotic spices, precious textiles, and noble metals. Samaria represented the maximum materialization of any ancient kingdom's dream. The metropolis exuded prosperity and authority, with surveillance structures that pierced the clouds and defensive systems considered miracles of military engineering for that era. However, here lies the first disturbing truth. Beneath this facade of magnificence, a silent corruption was germinating in the depths. Samaria's leaders initiated risky pacts, transcending mere political questions to enter dangerous spiritual territory. They imported alien deities, erected sanctuaries for Baal, the Canaanite entity associated with fertility and natural forces. Monarch Ahab, manipulated by his consort Jezebel, converted Samaria into a veritable sanctuary of idolatrous practices. And we're not describing merely symbolic ceremonies. We're documenting sacrifices of human lives, sexual commercialization within sacred precincts, and moral degeneration in all social layers. Religious leaders commercialized favors, magistrates negotiated verdicts, and the privileged crushed the vulnerable without compassion, while simultaneously simulating reverence to the Most High during sacred days. The population that should worship the one God, the architect of the cosmos, had exchanged truth for falsehood, and the scenario worsened. They interpreted their opulence as divine confirmation of their choices, as if their fabricated deities were legitimizing their civilization. They had no awareness that this abundance was merely the quietness that precedes the demolishing hurricane that was approaching. With each dawn, the abyss between Samaria and its original destiny widened, but no inhabitant demonstrated perception or concern about this progressive spiritual decadence. Here's a fact that will freeze your spine. God didn't obliterate Samaria without issuing prior warnings. For entire generations, messengers were designated to warn the population. Elijah confronted the worshippers of Baal on Mount Carmel, demonstrating that exclusively the Lord is authentic divinity. Elisha executed supernatural prodigies, attempting to reignite the people's trust. Hosea proclaimed about the inevitable reckoning. Amos denounced social inequalities, exploitation of the disadvantaged, and religious falsity that dominated Samaria. Each spokesperson brought an unequivocal declaration: change direction or suffer the consequences. Yet their messages resonated like whispers in the void. But you know what the collective reaction was? Absolute apathy. Some mocked the messengers, others hunted them. The majority simply disregarded the alerts and maintained their existence of extravagance and transgression. Their thinking was, "We're excessively dominant to fail. Our defenses are impassable. Our military strength is unbeatable. No threat can conquer us." This is the risk of blind pride. This is the catastrophe of spiritual presumption. Religious authorities even ridiculed the prophets publicly, labeling them as demented and sensationalists, while the multitudes applauded and returned to their festivities and empty celebrations. And here's the terrifying correlation with our times. How many people are disregarding the indicators around them? How many are existing as if there were no repercussions for their decisions? How many are replacing permanent principles with ephemeral satisfactions, presuming there will always be opportunity for rectification? Samaria demonstrates to us that there exists an irreversible limit, an instant when warnings cease and the sentence materializes. And when that instant manifests, there's no more return. Samaria's catastrophe lies in the fact that they received all imaginable chances for transformation, but deliberately opted for the path of annihilation, maintaining until the last second the belief that they were too special to crumble. In the year 722 before the Common Era, the unthinkable materialized. The Assyrian Empire, commanded by Shalmaneser V and later by Sargon II, advanced against Samaria. The Assyrians were notorious for their cruelty without parallel. They didn't merely subjugate territories, they eliminated them from existence. And Samaria would be their next objective. Information about the Assyrian advance arrived like tides of dread, with narratives of adjacent metropolises being totally devastated. But even so, Samaria preserved its lethal arrogance. The siege endured 3 interminable and anguishing years. Visualize the scene, a city previously replete with provisions now confronting extreme starvation. Sacred records document that the situation reached such desperation that the population consumed any substance to keep themselves alive. Mothers contemplated their children with unimaginable anguish. Water reservoirs dried up, diseases propagated. The aroma of death hovered over the once pulsating thoroughfares. The wealthy who previously exhibited their possessions now competed for food fragments with the miserable they once disdained. During those 3 years, there still existed a window for rectification. God was still granting a final opportunity for the people to beg for compassion, renounce their false gods, and return to Him. But Samaria's pride surpassed their desperation. They trusted in their fortifications until the final moment. They trusted in fragile political pacts. They trusted in absolutely everything, except the only one who could rescue them. Some even persisted offering sacrifices to the idols of Baal, begging for a salvation that would never come from those inert and impotent divinities. And then the inevitable materialized. The walls were perforated. Assyrian warriors invaded the city with unimaginable brutality. Samaria, the metropolis that seemed impregnable, succumbed. But the tragedy transcended this moment. The Assyrians possessed a brutal tactic to ensure that conquered peoples would never insurgent. They deported complete populations. Approximately 27,000 Israelites were ripped from their homes and transported to distant territories in Mesopotamia and beyond. Family nuclei were fragmented. Children violently separated from their mothers. A complete nation was dispersed like particles in the wind. The ivory palaces were plundered, the sanctuaries profaned, and even the city's foundations were destroyed as a warning to any other people who dared contest Assyrian power. And here's the most disturbing detail. These people never returned. Unlike the southern kingdom, Judah, which after 7 decades of exile in Babylon managed to return, the northern tribes of Israel simply evaporated from the historical narrative. They are known to this day as the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Samaria wasn't simply subjugated, it was completely eradicated as a national entity. What once represented the pride of a civilization transformed into a heap of rubble and a perpetual symbol of the repercussions of insurgency against God. A lesson engraved in history for all subsequent generations. So, what teachings can we extract from Samaria's collapse? Why does this narrative of almost 3 millennia still hold relevance for us today? Let me present the lessons that can literally revolutionize your existence. These aren't merely historical lessons, they are immutable principles that continue operating in the lives of individuals, families, and nations to contemporary days. First teaching. Material abundance doesn't represent confirmation of divine approval. Samaria was at the apogee of its wealth when it was already spiritually a corpse. How many contemporary people measure success exclusively by financial resources, notoriety, or authority without perceiving they're empty internally? True prosperity germinates in the soul. You can have abundant financial reserves and a desolate heart. You can have a luxurious residence but live in spiritual misery. You can be acclaimed by masses but be completely lost in what genuinely matters. Second teaching. Disregarding alerts generates irreparable consequences. The prophets were dispatched repeatedly but were refused. Today, many disregard their conscience, disregard the signs, disregard God's voice communicating through circumstances and people. But there will come a moment when there will be no more alerts, only repercussions. Each disregarded alert hardens the heart more. Each rejected prophet makes rectification more difficult, and there exists a fatal moment when the door of compassion closes and only the bitter harvest of seeds planted during years of insurgency remains. Third teaching, we cannot serve opposing authorities. Samaria tried to amalgamate worship of the true God with cult of pagan idols. They desired the best of both universes. But God demands integral devotion. Today, how many try to maintain one leg in faith and another in the mundane system, presuming they can balance contradictory values? Samaria's collapse demonstrates to us that this strategy is unsustainable. You cannot worship God one day and live for yourself the rest of the week. You cannot clamor for blessings while embracing transgressions. You cannot expect divine protection while making alliances with everything God rejects. Fourth teaching, pride precedes demolition. Samaria trusted excessively in its own capacities. It judged itself invincible. Pride blinded its leaders to the surrounding spiritual reality, and when they awakened, it was too late. Humility, on the other hand, unlocks doors for redemption. It's humility that allows us to recognize our errors and seek transformation before it's too late. Every great empire that crumbled, every person who self-destructed, every family that shattered, began with the same fatal arrogance. This will never happen to me. But history repeatedly proves that no one is above the spiritual laws that govern the universe. Fifth teaching, and perhaps the most critical, God's compassion is genuine, but so is justice. God is love, yes, but he is also just. He is patient, but his patience isn't unlimited. Samaria had centuries of opportunities to repent, warnings upon warnings, miracles to awaken trust. But when the chalice of iniquity overflowed, judgment came. This doesn't transform God into a tyrant. This reveals him as a father who respects our choices, even when those choices destroy us. He doesn't force anyone to love him, doesn't oblige anyone to obey, but also doesn't prevent us from harvesting what we plant, because a God who didn't exercise justice would be accomplice to evil and traitor to the victims of exploitation. So, what are you going to do with this narrative? Will you simply close this video and return to your routine as if nothing had occurred? Or will you allow Samaria's catastrophe to be a mirror that reflects uncomfortable truths about your own existence? This is the moment of truth. The moment when you decide whether you'll be just another observer of history or someone who learns from it and transforms their destiny. Perhaps at this exact instant, you're building your own Samaria, walls of self-sufficiency, sanctuaries for contemporary idols like capital, recognition, pleasures, or destructive relationships. Perhaps you're so busy building your version of success that you do not perceive you are spiritually besieged, that you're surrounded by consequences you still can't visualize, but that are approaching. Perhaps you're in those 3 years of spiritual siege right now, still with time to cry out for rescue, but choosing to trust in the wrong walls, the wrong gods, the wrong solutions. Or perhaps you're like those disregarded prophets. You observe people around you living destructively and feel powerless. You alert, but no one listens. Don't give up. Continue being a prophetic voice. Continue pointing to the correct path, even when it's unpopular. Because if just one person hears and changes direction, everything will have been worthwhile. Remember that Elijah thought he was alone, but God had 7,000 who hadn't bowed to Baal. So stay firm, because your voice may be the last alert someone needs before collapse. The truth is this: Samaria's narrative isn't just about judgment. It's about opportunity, the opportunity to learn from past mistakes, the opportunity to choose a different path before it's too late, the opportunity to descend from the walls of pride and run into the arms of a God who is still willing to forgive, restore, and restart. Every judgment story in the scriptures is preceded by hundreds of untold stories of rejected compassion. And today, you have the chance to be a redemption story instead of becoming another example of avoidable destruction. Today, at this moment, you have a choice that those inhabitants of Samaria no longer have. You can choose humility instead of pride. You can choose rectification instead of insurgency. You can choose life instead of destruction. That's the beauty of biblical narrative. It doesn't exist just to inform us about the past, but to transform us in the present and prepare us for the future. The difference between you and Samaria is simple. They no longer have a chance. But you still do, and this may be the last opportunity you'll receive to change course before consequences become irreparable. So here's my final challenge for you. In the next 7 days, make an honest assessment of your life. Ask yourself, what are my contemporary idols? Where am I trusting in my own strength instead of trusting in God? Which alerts am I disregarding? What changes do I need to make before it's too late? And don't stop at reflection. Act. Take concrete steps toward a life that honors God and brings true meaning. Write these answers, be brutally honest with yourself, and then make practical and immediate decisions. Because reflection without action is just another form of spiritual procrastination that Samaria mastered perfectly. And one last thing, share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. You can be the modern prophet in someone's life. You can be the alert that person needs to change course before collapse. Don't underestimate the power of sharing truth in a world full of convenient lies. It could be a friend who's destroying themselves with addictions, a family member who's building their life on false foundations, a colleague who's trading eternal values for temporary successes. And your simple act of sharing could be the instrument God uses to save them from disaster. If this video impacted you, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate notifications. Comment below which lesson from Samaria touched your heart the most. And remember, history doesn't need to repeat itself. You can choose a different ending. You can be different from Samaria. The choice, as always, is yours. But choose quickly, because the time of grace doesn't last forever. And one day, each of our stories will be told as an example of wisdom or a warning of foolishness. Until the next video, and may you live with wisdom, humility, and eternal purpose.